Okay, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I am so sorry about that delay. Sorry for some technical difficulties on our side. But I am super excited for everybody to join us today. My name is Yareli Aguirre. I am the National Digital and Distributed Organizer here with Unemployed Workers United. And welcome to our Health and Safety Workshop today. Yay. So there is a lot of exciting information being shared out today on how we could keep each other safe. But before we move on, I first want to take the time to talk about how we could get involved. So next slide, please. If it should, oh, there you go. Okay, cool. Perfect. So we're gonna take 3 minutes. So if everyone could please join our Facebook group to keep up with any future updates or events, what we're gonna do is you're gonna take out your phones and you're gonna pull up the camera app. And what you're gonna do is you're going to scan the QR code and it should take you to our Facebook group. And if you are joining through your phone, you could also take a screenshot of this code or go to Facebook and look up Unemployed Workers United. And if anything, if none of that works, you could also go to our uwunited.com/Facebook-group. If anything, I will also drop it down in the chat for everyone to join us down here in the chat box. So now you have multiple options to join our Facebook group. Again, this is for you to get updated with anything that's going on or any future events or updates. Now, if everybody has completed that section, I want a thumbs up. You could either turn on your camera and show your beautiful faces and give it a virtual thumbs up, use an emoji, or you could drop it down in the chat box down below or unmute yourself. So until I see some thumbs up from everybody, that's when we'll move on from this section. Can I get a couple thumbs up once you're done with that Facebook follow? Perfect. Yes, I love the emojis. Continue. I'm gonna give everybody 1 more minute to just do that Facebook group. Again, if you want to scan the QR code, pull out your phone, just scan the QR code with your camera. If not, go to the uwunited.com/Facebook group. It's also in the chat box down below, or you could just look us up on Unemployed Workers United on Facebook. And you can hear my daughter in the background. She's getting attacked by puppies. You're okay. Levántate. Okay, perfect. Now, before we continue moving on to talk about who we are and the rest of this wonderful presentation, if you are a worker who has gone through a temporary staffing agency, we would love to hear from you. If you have a story to tell, you could just email us at info@unemployedworkersunited or uwu.org. I will drop this down in the chat box below también. Again, this is just if you have if you have worked through a temporary staffing agency. There you go, it's down in the chat box. Now, if we could please move on to the next slide. I want to talk about who we are. So first, Unemployed Workers United, or UU for short, is a movement project to organize unemployed, underemployed workers facing precarious employment. This project is run by a coalition of organizers who actually want to help us survive, to build the largest multiracial working class coalition in the United States alongside anchor orgs like Mi Gente, Worker Center Project, People's Action, United for Respect, or Working Families Party. Now, we also have NLAN in the house, so the National Legal Advocacy Network, yay. So I will pass it on to our wonderful speaker, Lorraine, to talk about what NLAN is all about.
Thank you, Yareli. My name is Lorraine. I'm a legal organizer with National Legal Advocacy Network. Also on the line with myself today is Tyler Sprague, Inland's amazing staff attorney. So National Legal Advocacy Network is a legal nonprofit that it believes in leveraging legal resources to support and embolden the low-wage worker movement and low-wage workers throughout the country. So we do this by partnering with worker centers, member-based organizations like Unemployed Workers United, and bringing in legal resources when we can, to resource them, but also develop and lead trainings like this one and enforcement strategies like litigation, policy support, and more. And from here on, I'm going to be talking for a while before I pass to Tyler. So we're just going to get started. So first of all, we want to hear from you. So this is, we're about to be asking a few questions and we would love to hear from you. So feel free to just unmute or answer in the chat. So first of all, what makes you feel safe? Right. So we're here today to talk about health and safety. What makes you feel safe? We can keep this broad too. So in general, what makes you feel safe? I can go first. I feel safe when I know I have a home to come back to at the end of the day. Oops.
Ureli, can I jump in?
Yes, of course, jump in. Anybody
Sure.
who wants to join, please unmute yourself.
Home also makes me feel safe. I think that for me, I like a nice warm blanket, you know, just something comfortable among my surroundings.
Yeah.
That always makes me feel safe.
I love that. Nice warm blanket. Anybody else? What makes you feel safe?
I could go super quick. I feel like when I'm alone home at night, locking all the doors, making sure that home care is all protected kind of thing. That makes me feel safe.
Okay. Yeah. Locking all the doors, making sure you're going to be safe. Okay. Anybody else have anything else that makes them feel safe? You can think about your home. You can think about the workplace, which we'll be focusing on today. You can think about your body and where you feel safety. Okay. Well, if you think of something later, feel free to let us know. We'll go ahead and move on to the next question. So if you're currently working, what health and safety concerns do you have about your workplace? If you're not currently working, what health and safety concerns do you have about returning to work or starting a job? So what we're going to talk about today is about the workplace. And we know that some, folks are in between jobs or unemployed right now. Some people might be considering trying to get back into the workforce right now. I can tell you when I heard the other day. The other day, someone told me that they are concerned about going back to work because they are immunocompromised and they're worried about getting COVID.
I can jump in. I know another one that I've heard is concern in being able to afford like PPE equipment, masks, hand sanitizer, things of that nature.
I think another one would be like, for example, my mom, she was afraid to go back to work because I feel like the job wouldn't have given her enough sick time, especially since it's still going around.
Yeah, no access to sick pay is a really big one. Anybody else? Concerns about the workplace being unsafe or unhealthy? Any concerns about going back to work? Okay. All right. So thinking about those things, what would be the impact of not having health and safety at the workplace? Going off of the one I just said about COVID, the impact would be that someone would be getting very sick and potentially needing to be hospitalized or dying. So that's a very big impact. Okay. Anything else? The impact of not having health and safety at work.
Sure. I think just especially if folks are getting sick, not being able to pay for bills or meet, like having to choose between bills also.
Mhm. Yeah, having to choose between bills, or even, if you don't have health and safety at work, maybe you can't keep working, and maybe that's some loss of income. Okay. All right, we will move on from this. Thank you for participating. All right, so what we will cover today, obviously we're talking about health and safety. I'm going to get this big again for everybody. All right, so obviously we're talking about health and safety today. So we're going to first go over your rights in the workplace related to health and safety. So we have to, we have to talk about laws, unfortunately, to talk about what your rights are. So we're going to go over OSHA, that's the Occupational Safety and Health Act, Americans with Disability Act, and paid sick days, and the Family Medical Leave Act. Next, we will talk about enforcement. So the way that you can enforce those rights. And then we'll go over some tools to track and document health and safety. So an important disclaimer that we just have to give. Remember, I said we're a legal nonprofit. I'm a legal organizer, not an attorney. Tyler is an attorney, but regardless, this information provided in the workshop is not intended to be and should not be taken as legal advice. The laws that I mentioned earlier, the rights we're going over today, are based on federal laws. So your state, your locality, like your city, might have additional and perhaps stronger laws. So it's really important to check that as well. And if you're dealing with a specific health and safety issue, you really may want to get in touch with an expert or an attorney in your local area to make sure that you're covering all your bases. All right, so what your rights are in the workplace. Let's talk about it. We don't want you slipping like this person. I'm going to pass it over to Tyler to get us started with OSHA.
Yeah. So OSHA is the primary federal law that sets workplace health and safety standards. So OSHA created the Occupational Safety Health Administration within the Department of Labor that enforces these standards. So these standards include, next slide, please. So first being, employers have a responsibility to provide a safe and healthy workplace. So this means your workplace should be free of all dangerous conditions. This includes faulty wiring, mold, rotten floorboards, etc. Next. Second, employers must find and correct health and safety issues. So this could be them physically removing the hazard. It could be them isolating workers from the hazard. It could be changing the way people work entirely, maybe giving them a different position. And the last being, which I believe is really important, is providing PPE equipment. Next slide. So employers must inform employees about chemical hazards and substances. They must also take reasonable steps to limit the amount of hazard chemicals or noise that workers could be exposed to. Next. So employers must post OSHA citations, injuries and illnesses data, as well as OSHA posters in the workplace where it can be seen by everyone. So this could be the break room. An example that would not work is a supply closet or a gender-specific bathroom where only maybe one individual or one group of individuals can see this notice. Next. So lastly, employers must keep accurate records of all work-related injuries and illnesses. If a worker suffers an injury and wants to apply for workers' compensation and file suit with the appropriate law enforcement agency, they can request from their employer records specific to that incident. The employer is obligated to give it to them. Next. Oh. I do want to stop really quickly and note that there are 4 specific groups of OSHA standards. So that could be in construction, it can be in maritime, that's involving sea, agricultural, agriculture, and then just the general industry. So that applies to most employers, and it requires them to require keeping the worksite free of all recognized hazards. And I'll pivot to the last one. So OSHA hasn't set specific standards for COVID-19. However, there are existing OSHA guidelines in place that can help prevent the spread of COVID-19. So for example, OSHA has issued some guidance on steps that employers can take to reduce the transmission of COVID in the workplace. And this includes first being the general duty clause. So that requires employers to provide employment, okay. I'm sorry, so now I can pop up, but that requires employers to provide employment free from recognized hazards that are likely to cause serious death or harm. Second is PPE standards. So that requires a PPE hazard assessment, such as respiratory equipment that can be used when necessary. And lastly, it's just important to note that some states have occupational health and safety programs that are more protective and hands-on than OSHA. So it's really important to take a look at your state requirements. And I will stop and pass it over to Lorraine.
Thank you, Tyler. Okay, so as we go along, if you're watching on live stream, or you watch later, you can feel free to reach back out to Uwu or to us to ask a question on these things. Yeah, I think it's a little hard sometimes when we talk about laws and then we think about this very practical situation. So feel free to reach back out. So I'm going to just briefly talk about the Americans with Disabilities Act. So this is a federal law that prohibits employers from discriminating against workers with documented disabilities. And it requires employers to provide reasonable accommodations for those workers. So what's considered a documented disability? Anything that is a physical, mental, or mental impairment that substantially limits a major life activity. So that could include working, speaking, walking, anything. So if it substantially limits a major life activity, like if you are no longer able to go to the grocery store for yourself, if you are no longer able to, bathe yourself, those could be signals that you might have a documented disability and you might be able to have some accommodation at work. So if you do have a documented disability, you can be protected at work from discrimination. So in order to be protected from discrimination based on a disability, a worker must be able to perform the essential functions of the job. So that just means, even if you have a disability and you want a job, if it's all the skills that you just truly cannot meet because of that disability, the employer is allowed to say that that's not the right fit. But if you're able to perform those essential functions, you could request an accommodation. So an accommodation may include a change in job tasks, reserved parking, improved accessibility to work areas, whether that be physical, electronic, whatever, allowing flexible work schedules, providing or adjusting tools or equipment, and more. So it could, say you have a noise or light sensitivity, you could make a request accommodation to be placed in an area where it's okay to keep it dark or where it's a little bit quieter, something like that. We're jumping around again, but we're staying on the same page with thinking about when it's really hard to be in the workplace because of a health and safety issue. So Family Medical Leave Act. This is a law that allows some workers to take up to 12 weeks of unpaid job protected leave per year for very certain specific family or medical reasons. So the reasons that eligible workers, we'll go over who's eligible right after this, but if you are eligible, here are the reasons that you would be able to use FMLA and have your job protected. The birth or care of a newborn, the placement of a child or a foster care child or an adoption, care for an immediate family member with a serious health condition. That's a pretty important one, especially right now as COVID is still happening and folks are still experiencing some long-term medical effects, or medical leave when you personally are unable to work because of a serious health condition. So in order to be able to take FMLA for one of those 4 reasons, and this gets kind of into numbers, but it's just those very strict rules. So you must have worked for the employer for at least 12 months. You must have worked at least 1,250 hours for the employer during that 12-month period. And you must work at a location where the employer has at least 50 employees within 75 miles. So, for example, myself, I work at a legal nonprofit. And well, I would not necessarily qualify for FMLA myself because we have, less than 50 employees. So it's just important to know that within 75 miles. So if you work at a restaurant, but there's another restaurant, every few miles of the same corporation, you likely are eligible. Most folks who work in general industry type work are likely eligible. So super unfortunately, as we're thinking about taking time off for those larger medical issues, what about the smaller ones? What about when you have a cold, when you maybe get COVID, or when you just don't feel well and you know that you won't be able to be healthy and safe at work? Very unfortunately, there is no federal law that provides or that requires employers to provide paid sick days. So there was the Family First Coronavirus Act, and that was, emergency legislation brought about after COVID. And that did provide sick paid leave to many workers, but unfortunately it has expired, even though COVID is still happening. So one super important thing to note is that while there's no federal law, some states or cities do have their own paid sick day standards. So it's really important to just figure out if you have a state or city that says you are allowed and you have the right to certain sick days. And you can find that out fairly easily just by typing in Google your state and your city name and then paid sick day standards. I'm going to pass it back to Tyler to talk about how you can enforce those rights. So you know them now, but how can you make sure that they're upheld?
Yeah, thanks, Ring. So what do you do? Next slide, please. Awesome. So we already talked about OSHA. OSHA is the agency that enforces the OSHA Act. So workers can file anonymously and confidentially, and OSHA will investigate your claim. It also prohibits retaliation if a worker decides to report an unsafe working condition. Next slide, please. The EEOC. So the EEOC is an agency that enforces law prohibiting discrimination based on disability, discrimination, and harassment. It's important to note that EEOC has a strict statute of limitations. So depending on your state requirements, this could range between 180 days or 180 days or 380 days. It just really depends on the state that you live in. And you have to file with the EEOC before being able to take your issue to court. Just in terms of process, you will file a complaint with the EEOC. They will investigate your claim. And then upon the close of the investigation, they will issue a right to sue, which will allow you to take your claim to the court. Next slide. So the Department of Labor is the agency that enforces FMLA violations that Lorraine was just speaking about. Workers can file a complaint with the Department of Labor, or they can retain a lawyer and bring a private lawsuit. And next slide. So other factors to consider if your rights are violated. So first being that there's different, as I spoke about the statute of limitations, there are different laws between the state versus federal. So the federal agencies that we're describing here are very, very important baseline protections. But again, your state laws may provide more protection than other federal laws on paid sick days, on family leave, disability discrimination, and health and safety protection. So although there is no federal law regarding paid sick days, you could still have protection under your state. So yeah, it's just worth exploring all avenues, especially when you're considering cross-filing. Another thing is private litigation. So, when do you consider bringing on an attorney? So private litigation is an option for enforcing sick day and family leave violations. So it can be an option for disability discrimination claims, for example, but again, only after filing with the EEOC. Private litigation, unfortunately, is not an option for OSHA violations. However, it's possible that workers can bring a claim for negligence on the part of their employer for unreasonable health and safety risks in the workplace. So if a worker falls down, just like, the stick figure on the side, although you won't be able to pursue legal action for OSHA, you could do it for negligence as a tort claim. And workers may have more say and direction just over strategy if they bring private litigation. So that is a helpful option if you're looking for a little bit more control. Also, bringing litigation on behalf of a group of workers could create more leverage and reduce fear of retaliation. And last being organizing. So organizing is often a promising route for addressing health and safety concerns, particularly because you can't, or private litigation is not an option for OSHA violations. So organizing is a really good alternative. ADA and OSHA all have anti-retaliation provisions, so that's absolutely something that you guys can organize around. Additionally, the NLRA protects workers' right to organize. So this is always a great route. And I'll pause there and pass it back to Lorraine.
Okay, thank you, Tyler. It's our dance, passing back and forth. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about tools to track and document health and safety issues. So, Tyler mentioned organizing before as an alternative to litigation, and we'll just say that, we are strong believers, even though we come from a legal nonprofit, in the power of organizing, not just as an alternative, but even as like the first choice. Sometimes organizing is going to get you a lot more than pursuing something through the law ever will. So it's your workplace and you're starting to feel like there are a lot of issues. You're really not feeling healthy and safe. One thing is that oftentimes hazards in the workplace are so pervasive that they might just go unnoticed. You might get so used to having a hazard that you might not even consider it a hazard at some point. So drawing a physical map is one way to help really bring that to the surface so that it's known that that's a hazard and it's not okay just because it's been normalized. So the purpose of a hazard map is to track and monitor the hazards in the workplace. The biggest and one important one, to talk with your coworkers about workplace safety and to develop a plan with them to eliminate hazards or to try to find some solutions to those hazards. So the way you would do this is by starting with a blank piece of paper. You don't have to be an artist, and draw a basic layout of your workplace. I have an example following this slide. So a basic layout of your workplace, I usually start with just a rectangle, right? Like the shape of the building, whatever the shape of the physical space you're in. And then you just start first by identifying important parts of the workplace. So draw where the bathroom is, draw where the doors are and the windows, that can just be super quick. And then you want to kind of go through that space and think about where you have ever felt that there are hazards. So let's say you often slip and fall in one place that doesn't have a mat. So that would be a hazard. Let's say, you work a grill in a kitchen and there's a really poor air ventilation system and you often feel like you can't breathe. That would be a hazard. Let's say you work as a packer and one of the lines has a broken feature and it hurts you and you have to work it. That would be a hazard. So we break them down into these categories: physical hazards, so things like heat, cold, leaks; chemical hazards, so dusts, gases, etc.; infection hazards, viruses like COVID; mold; unsafe workplace designs or policies. So maybe, pieces of equipment are too close to one another for safety. Maybe a policy is that you don't have any breaks, and that's unsafe for the time period. Or stressors, so the workload, you're getting harassed, or you have inadequate training. So here's an example of what I was just talking about. Let's say you work in a restaurant. I'll just quickly go through what this, how this came to be. So you would first draw, the workplace. So here's in the kitchen where the work, a lot of the work takes place, but obviously we have our servers out here. So in this situation, what folks identified was a very hot oven and not enough ventilation, and a broken fan with gas. Here at a prep station, they identified that last week a prep cook was sick when they came in, asked to go home and made to stay, putting everybody at risk. Here on the employee entrance, there's some uneven steps and some broken lamps, making employees feel unsafe as they enter and exit. And we've got some workload issues, only 1 to 2 servers when all tables are busy, and in addition to other issues. So this just kind of helps bring to light what the issues are. And if you do it with your coworkers, you can then kind of share and be able to really identify where something's consistent and it's enough of a hazard to organize around or address in some other way. Similar to a hazard map is a body map. Let's say you work in a job where you have a lot of manual labor or you're just stuck in the same position a lot. The purpose of a body map is to track and monitor pain on the body and injuries, illnesses on the body as related to work. So we have a template that has this, this very basic person's front and back body. And you would just think about where you often feel pain or have illness during or after work and mark those spots on your body map. This is good to do kind of regularly if you're someone that has that kind of pain, and maybe write the date on it for yourself to create a record showing that you've been tracking this and it's been worsening as the job goes on. A tip, just like last one, do it with your coworkers and then talk about it, see where patterns arise. Maybe everybody's having the same hand pain because this one tool is just not good enough. Demand letters. So once you've identified some of those hazards, demand letters can be used in situations that are unrelated to hazards. It's essentially a letter in which you are making demands of your employer. You are saying, we, the workers, have identified XYZ as problems in our workplace, and we are demanding that you change that. So it's a way to collectively articulate concerns and make demands. So in the situation of health and safety, you would maybe want to do that body and hazard mapping and then take that information and decide what you're going to make your demands. So examples of things that I've seen folks demand are sometimes a meeting to discuss concerns. Sometimes people don't want to list all their demands in a letter, and they're saying, you need to give us a seat at the table to have a conversation about these concerns. Personal protective equipment. Hazard elimination. So any of those hazards in the hazard map, you could demand in a demand letter. That's, you're not asking, you are demanding, but it's unclear, you're hoping your employer will do it. Breaks and more. So any issue you have at work. And we have a template demand letter that has been dropped in the chat and can be provided otherwise. And lastly, another tool is written requests for accommodations or leave. So we talked about Americans with Disabilities Act and how you might need to write a request for an accommodation. And we also talked about the Family Medical Leave Act, where you might need to go on leave for a health-related issue. So whenever those situations do arise where you feel like you need an accommodation or you need leave, request that, write it up, and keep it a copy for yourself, as well as turn it into your employer. So this would help create a track record of requests that could be useful in your organizing. So maybe you made a request for 2 accommodations and they were not met. You keep copies of those, and maybe you pursue that later with an attorney or otherwise. All right. I think we're going to go ahead and pass over Q&A unless anybody so far has any questions. I'll pause here for about 5 seconds. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Yareli to talk a little bit more about getting involved with UWU and to close us out.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you everyone for joining, and thank you everyone who is or futurely is joining on Facebook. A great way to get involved is by joining our National Unemployed Workers United Facebook group. You could either join our Facebook group by scanning this QR code with your phone. So what you could do right now, if you can, pull out your phone, pull up the camera, scan the QR code. It should take you to our page, and just give us a quick thumbs up and a follow. Another way that you could do that is just look us up at uwunited.com/Facebook group. If anything, I could also drop this link down in the chat box below. Another way that you could also get involved is if you have gone through a temporary staffing agency and you want to tell your story, we would love to hear that. We would definitely love to hear your story. So you could drop down your story or email us at info@uwunited.org. These 2 are the major ways that you could get involved. If you have any questions, please let us know. And honestly, thank you everyone for joining this Facebook, or for joining our Know Your Rights workshop, just because health and safety is so important. And sometimes you think that it's already just a given in a workplace, but sometimes it's not. And it's a mandatory conversation to have sometimes. So thank you all for joining us, and I will be closing us out. All those who is staff, please join us through our debrief. And I hope everybody has a great and wonderful day today. Bye.